I held the knife so tightly that my hands trembled. The blood was still warm as it dripped through my fingers. 2 bodies on the sacristy floor, 2 severed heads, 2 mouths that for years told me I was filthy, a sinner, that I deserved to suffer. Now they were finally silent. You know that feeling of relief that comes when you finally solve a problem that's tormented you your entire life? That's exactly what I felt. Not regret, not horror, just peace. And I know you must be thinking I'm a monster. Maybe you're right. But before you judge me, I need you to understand how I got there that September night, with a knife in my hand and 2 corpses at my feet. My name is Giovanni. I'm 23 years old and I'm here in my apartment, free for over a year now after serving my sentence. Yes, you heard that right. I killed 2 people. I beheaded a priest and a nun inside the church where I spent my entire adolescence. And no, I wasn't crazy. It wasn't a psychotic break. It was a decision. A decision that took years to mature inside me, like a tumor growing slowly, invisible, until it finally exploded. When the police arrived that night, I was still sitting there on the church pew, with blood-stained hands, staring at the crucifix on the wall. They expected to find a maniac, a demon, but they found only a skinny 20-year-old boy, crying silently, shivering with cold, even in the summer heat. I didn't run, didn't try to hide what I'd done. In fact, part of me wanted everyone to know. I wanted them to see what those 2 people did to me, what they turned me into. I was sentenced to 3 years for aggravated homicide with mitigating circumstances. My lawyer managed to prove that I suffered severe psychological abuse throughout my entire adolescence. He managed to show the medical reports, the hospitalizations for suicide attempts, the records of self-harm. The jury felt sorry for me. Some even cried when I told my story. 3 years seemed like too little for some people, too much for others. For me, each day in there was an eternity. I got out over a year ago, over a year trying to rebuild a life that never really existed. I wake up every day in my small apartment, look at my hands and still see blood, even knowing there's nothing there. I go to therapy twice a week. I take medication to sleep, for anxiety, for depression. I work at a supermarket bagging groceries. Nobody there knows who I am. Nobody knows what I did. And it's better that way. But today I need to tell this story. Not to justify myself, not to ask for forgiveness. Maybe just so you understand that not everything is black and white. That sometimes the victim becomes the monster because it was the only way out they found. That when you spend years being destroyed by people who should protect you, something inside you simply breaks and can't be fixed. I know what you're thinking. That no matter what they did to me, killing is never the answer. That I should have sought help, that there were other ways out, and maybe you're right, but you weren't there. You didn't feel what I felt. You didn't live inside my skin during those endless years of psychological torture. So before you condemn me, before you close this video in disgust, I ask you, listen to my story until the end, all of it, and then you decide if I'm a monster or just another victim of a system that failed. Because there's a lot that was never told in the newspapers, a lot that not even the jury completely understood. A lot that I kept to myself because I was ashamed, because I was afraid, because I thought nobody would believe me. But today, here, now, I'm going to tell everything. Every detail, every humiliation, every moment I thought about dying, every second that led me to that night in the sacristy. If you're really paying attention to my story, if you want to understand how a normal boy transformed into what I became, I need you to do something for me now. Like this video, subscribe to Traumatic Accounts, turn on notifications so you don't miss any story, and comment where you're watching this from right now. I need to know there are people on the other side really listening, really trying to understand, because what comes next will completely change the way you see this story. And I promise you one thing, by the end you'll understand. Maybe you won't agree, maybe you'll still think I'm a monster, but you'll understand. You'll understand that that September night wasn't the beginning of the story. It was just the inevitable end of something that started much, much earlier. I grew up in a Catholic family. Not the type of Catholic who goes to Mass occasionally. No. My mother, Teresa, was one of those fervent Catholics who lives inside the church, who thinks every word from the priest is divine law. My father, Robert, died when I was 6 years old. Cancer. It was fast. One day he was fine. 3 months later, he was in a coffin. I remember looking at him at the wake and not really understanding what was happening. My mother cried so much she fainted twice. I just wanted him to wake up. After my father died, my mother sank even deeper into religion. It was as if the church was the only thing keeping her alive. She started going to Mass every day, not just on Sundays every day, and she took me with her. I was 6, 7, 8 years old, and instead of playing with other children, I was sitting on a hard church pew, listening to endless sermons about sin and salvation. I was 9 years old when I met Father Marcus and Sister Beatrice. They were responsible for the catechism at Our Lady of Grace Parish, in the neighborhood where we lived, in North Chicago. Father Marcus was in his early 40s at the time, graying hair, always very serious, deep voice. Sister Beatrice was younger, maybe 35, thin, tall, piercing gaze. At first, they seemed like normal people, devoted, even kind. My mother adored them, especially Father Marcus. She said he was a holy man, chosen by God, that his words were divine wisdom. She trusted him blindly. So much so that when he suggested I start helping with masses as an altar boy, she was radiant. She said it was an honor that God was choosing me for something special. I was 10 years old when I started. At first, it was simple. Help prepare the altar, hold objects during Mass, light the candles. I felt important. My mother smiled at me from the congregation with so much pride that I wanted to do everything right just to see her happy. She suffered so much with my father's death that I would do anything to ease a little of her pain. But things changed quickly, very quickly. Father Marcus started calling me for private conversations in the sacristy. He said he needed to teach me important things about faith, about how to serve God correctly. At first, they were normal conversations. He asked about school, about my mother, about how I was dealing with my father's death. I thought he was being kind, that he cared. It was on the third or fourth conversation that he started with the strange comments. He asked if I had impure thoughts, if I thought about girls in sinful ways. I was 10 years old, barely knew what puberty was, but he insisted, said it was important for me to confess these thoughts, that keeping secrets from God was the path to hell. I said no, that I didn't think about those things. And that's when he changed. His face hardened. He leaned forward and said very quietly, "Are you lying to me, Giovanni? And lying is a sin, a grave sin." I started to tremble. I said I was telling the truth, but he didn't believe me. He ran his hand over my face, a caress that didn't feel like a caress, and whispered, "I'm going to have to purify you. I'm going to have to remove the demon that's making you lie." I didn't understand what he meant at the time. But I learned. In the following months, I learned very well. The conversations became forced confession sessions where he made me admit sins I never committed. He made me repeat that I was dirty, impure, that the devil was inside me. When I cried and said it wasn't true, he yelled at me, said I was arrogant, that arrogance was the worst of sins, that I would go to hell if I didn't repent. And Sister Beatrice, she was always there watching. Sometimes she participated. She said the priest was right, that I was indeed a problematic boy, that she saw evil in my eyes. She had a particular way of punishing me when, according to her, I wasn't repenting enough. She made me kneel on the cold sacristy floor for hours, with my arms outstretched, holding heavy books in each hand. If I lowered my arms, she hit my back with a wooden ruler. She said it was penance, that it was for my own good. I tried to tell my mother. God knows I tried. But how do you explain to a woman who idolizes the priest that he's hurting you psychologically? I was 11 years old and said to her, "Mom, I don't want to be an altar boy anymore. Father Marcus and Sister Beatrice are mean to me." You know what she did? She slapped me in the face, a hard slap. She said I was ungrateful, that I was being influenced by the demon, that speaking ill of a man of God was blasphemy. She dragged me to the church that same night and made me apologize to Father Marcus on my knees. He accepted my apology with a smile that said he had won, that I had nowhere to run, that he could do whatever he wanted to me because nobody would believe me. And he was right. I stopped trying to ask for help, stopped complaining, closed myself off completely. At school, teachers said I was too quiet, withdrawn, but nobody investigated, nobody asked why. I was just another shy boy, nothing special. Things got worse when I turned 12. Father Marcus and Sister Beatrice started working as a team in a more coordinated way. They created a system. He destroyed me psychologically, saying I was a sinner, that I was condemned. She offered me salvation if I followed exactly what they ordered. It was a perfect cycle of abuse. He broke me. She pretended to rebuild me, but only so I would become even more dependent on them. That was the most superficial part of everything, because what they were really planning and nobody knew. Only I know. Those strange looks and comments of desire about me. They said they would purify me in another way, in a disgusting way, that they competed to see who would be the first to do it to me. It gives me chills just thinking about it. Those desires they whispered in my ears. They said there was nowhere to escape. My only way out was to offer myself completely to them, so they could do whatever they wanted with me. In secret places. I started having nightmares. Every night I woke up sweating with my heart racing, feeling like I was being suffocated. I developed insomnia. I stopped eating properly. I lost so much weight that my clothes hung loose on me. My mother thought I was sick and took me to the doctor. He said I had depression and anxiety. He prescribed medication, but didn't ask why. Nobody ever asked why, and I continued being an altar boy. I continued going to church every day. I continued in their hands because there was no way out, because I was just a child and they had all the power, because my own mother was on their side. At 13, I tried to cut myself for the first time. I took a razor blade from the bathroom and made a cut on my forearm, not to die, just to feel something different from the emotional pain that consumed me. Physical pain seemed easier to bear, more real, more controllable. My mother saw it, cried, hugged me for the first time in years, said she loved me. But when I tried to tell her what was happening at the church, she simply got up and left the room. The next day, she scheduled sessions with a psychologist, but never questioned the priest or the nun. The psychologist helped me a little. At least there I could talk without being judged. But I didn't tell everything. I was afraid. Afraid of what my mother would do if she knew I was speaking ill of the religious people to a stranger. Afraid that somehow Father Marcus would find out and punish me even more. When I turned 14, the abuse reached a level I didn't think was possible. Father Marcus and Sister Beatrice were no longer content with just humiliating me during the purification sessions in the sacristy. They started using me as an example for other altar boys. There were 3 other boys who helped with masses: Philip, Luke, and Andrew. All between 10 and 12 years old, all innocent, all about to enter the same hell I lived, and I was used as a tool to control them. The priest made me stand in front of the others and confess my invented sins. He forced me to say out loud how I was impure, how I had dirty thoughts, how I deserved to be punished. The other boys looked at me with fear and disgust. Philip, who was my friend, stopped talking to me. I had become a pariah, an example of what happens when you stray from God's path. Sister Beatrice had a more refined cruelty. She gave me impossible tasks and then punished me when I failed. Once she told me to clean the entire church in 2 hours. It was physically impossible. When I didn't finish, she made me stay on my knees during the entire Mass the next day in front of all the faithful, holding a sign that said, "I am lazy and disobey God." My mother was in the congregation. She saw it and did nothing. Afterward, she came to me and said I needed to try harder, that I was disappointing God. In that moment, something inside me died. The hope that she would one day wake up and protect me simply evaporated. At 15, I made my first serious suicide attempt. I gathered all the medication I took for depression and anxiety and swallowed them all at once. I wrote a letter explaining everything, absolutely everything. The years of psychological abuse, the humiliations, my mother's indifference, the desire to simply stop existing because the pain was too great. My mother found me passed out on my bedroom floor. They took me to the hospital, did a stomach pump. I spent 3 days hospitalized. And you know what happened to the letter? My mother read it, cried, tore it up, and never touched the subject again. When I returned home, she just said, "Don't do that again. Think about me. Think about her." As if I hadn't done that precisely because thinking about her wasn't enough to keep me alive. I was admitted to a psychiatric clinic for 2 weeks. There, finally, away from the church, away from my mother, away from the priest and the nun, I could breathe. The doctor said I had severe depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. They recommended intensive therapy and removal from stressful environments. When I was discharged, I had hope. Hope that my mother would finally understand that I wouldn't have to go back to church anymore. But on the first Sunday after my release, she woke me up at 6 in the morning and said, "Get up, we have Mass." I begged. I cried. I said the doctors recommended I stay away. She responded, "The doctors don't know God like I know God. You need prayer, not medication." I went back, and Father Marcus was waiting for me with that smile. "Giovanni," he said, "good that you came back. Your mother told me about your incident. I see the demon still fights for your soul. But don't worry. We're going to intensify your purification. Intensify." That word echoed in my head for days, and they kept their promise. The sessions in the sacristy became longer, more cruel. Father Marcus started using more sophisticated psychological torture techniques. He made me stand facing the wall for hours, while he repeated in a low voice like a mantra, "You're worthless. You're trash. God doesn't love you. You're going to burn in hell." Sometimes Sister Beatrice would come in the middle of the session and change the discourse. "But God can forgive you," she said in a honeyed voice. "If you truly repent, if you accept suffering as penance, if you obey without questioning." It was perfect brainwashing. They destroyed me and then offered me a false salvation that only trapped me more in the cycle of abuse. I discovered later, much later, that they did this to others, that I wasn't the first, that there was a pattern. Father Marcus chose boys from single-parent families, where the mother was extremely religious, vulnerable boys who would have nowhere to run. And Sister Beatrice was the perfect accomplice, validating all the abuse as divine will. At 16, I started researching them. I used the school computer to search for Father Marcus's name. I found something, an old news article from almost 15 years ago about a psychological abuse complaint at another parish. It came to nothing. The complaint was filed for lack of evidence, but it was there. The evidence that he had done this before. I printed the news and took it to my mother. I put it in front of her and said, Look at what your holy priest has already done." She read it. I saw tears in her eyes. I thought that finally she would wake up, but then she tore the paper into small pieces and said, "This is the devil's lie. They're trying to destroy a man of God. And you?" She pointed at me. "You're being used by the devil." In that moment, I understood I would never have my mother back, that the woman who gave birth to me had been completely consumed by religious fanaticism, that she chose the priest instead of choosing her own son, that for her, I was less important than maintaining the image of perfection of her church, her priest, her faith. Something broke inside me that day. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was coldness, a disconnection, as if my soul simply gave up feeling anything. I spent the next 2 years on autopilot. I went to church, accepted the abuse, took the medication, went to therapy sessions and lied to the psychologist saying I was better. I finished high school with mediocre grades. I didn't make friends, didn't have a girlfriend, didn't live, just existed. But inside, something was growing, a cold, calculated rage that I kept hidden. I observed Father Marcus and Sister Beatrice, mentally noted their patterns, their schedules, their habits. I didn't know yet what I would do with this information, but I felt that one day it would be important. At 18, I tried to leave home. I got a job at a diner, saved money for 3 months, and rented a tiny room on the other side of the city. I told my mother I was leaving. She begged me to stay. She cried. She said I was all she had, and for the first time in my life, I responded with anger. "And even so, you chose them instead of me." I stayed away for 5 months. They were the best 5 months of my life. Away from the church, away from the priest, away from the nun, away from my mother. I woke up and had no fear. I slept without nightmares. I was starting to feel human again. But then my mother had a heart attack. They called from the hospital saying she was serious, that I needed to go. I dropped everything and ran. I spent 3 days in the hospital by her side. When she woke up, she held my hand and asked, "Come back home. I don't want to die alone." And I went back. Like an idiot, I went back. And guess who was there waiting with that smile? Father Marcus. He visited my mother at the hospital every day. When he saw me, he said, "Giovanni, my son, good that you came back to take care of your mother. God rewards devoted children." I went back to church too, not because I wanted to, but because my mother was too fragile and I couldn't say no to her. And the cycle started again. The abuse, the humiliations, the psychological torture, as if the 5 months of freedom had never existed. But now I was older, stronger, and the rage I had stored grew, stopped being cold and calculated, and started to boil. I started having violent fantasies. I saw Father Marcus preaching and imagined my hands around his neck. I saw Sister Beatrice praying and imagined her lifeless body on the floor. I scared myself with these thoughts, but they didn't stop. The more they hurt me, the more vivid the fantasies became, more real, more inevitable. At 19, I started planning, not consciously at first, but I observed, noted, thought about how it would be possible. The priest and the nun stayed alone in the sacristy after the 7 p.m. Mass, counting the donation money and organizing things for the next day. The church was empty, just the two of them. It was the perfect opportunity, but I still had some humanity in me, some voice saying that was wrong, that there were other ways out, that I could simply leave again and never come back. Until the incident with Andrew happened. Andrew was the youngest of the altar boys. He was 12 years old. A sweet, innocent boy who loved serving at church. I started noticing that Father Marcus was giving special attention to him, the same attention he gave me in the beginning, the same invitations for private conversations in the sacristy. I knew what was coming. I knew Andrew was going to go through the same hell I went through, and I couldn't let that happen. I looked for Andrew's mother and told her everything, absolutely everything. What the priest did to me, what the nun did, the pattern of abuse, the suicide attempts, everything. I begged her to get Andrew out of there before it was too late. You know what she did? She went straight to Father Marcus to tell him what I said, and he, the son of a bitch, denied everything. He said I was a disturbed boy, that I had mental problems, that I was making up stories for attention, and she believed him. Andrew continued being an altar boy, and 3 months later I saw him crying alone in a corner of the church. I approached and asked what had happened. He looked at me with those scared eyes and said, "The priest said I'm impure, that the demon is in me. Please, Giovanni, help me. I don't want to be bad." My heart shattered. That innocent child was being destroyed the same way I was. And nobody did anything, nobody believed, nobody cared. It was in that moment I made my decision. Not an impulsive decision, not an episode. It was a cold, clear, definitive decision. I was going to stop those two. If the system did nothing, if people didn't believe, if God didn't intervene, then I would intervene. Because if I did nothing, Andrew would just be another victim, and after him would come another, and another, and another. It would never end unless someone ended it, and that someone would be me. I spent 6 months planning. It wasn't something I did overnight. Every detail was thought out, every possibility considered. I knew I would have only one chance. If I failed, they would destroy me completely. If I succeeded, I would lose my freedom. But honestly, I wasn't free already. I was already trapped for years in that cycle of abuse. At least this way, I would free other children from going through the same thing. I studied their routine meticulously. Every Tuesday and Friday after the 7 p.m. Mass, Father Marcus and Sister Beatrice stayed alone in the sacristy for about an hour. They counted donations, organized liturgical objects, prepared everything for the following Masses. During that time, the church was completely empty. The custodian only arrived at 9 to lock everything up. It was the perfect window. I thought about various ways to do it. Poison seemed clean, but difficult to obtain and administer. An accident would be difficult to fabricate convincingly. In the end, I decided it would be something direct, without subterfuge, without lies. I wanted them to know. I wanted them to see my face. I wanted them to understand that this was a consequence of their actions. I chose the date, September 15th, 2022, a Friday. I had turned 23 weeks before. I was of legal age, would be tried as an adult. I was ready to accept the consequences. I bought a kitchen knife at a housewares store far from the neighborhood. I paid cash. I wore a cap and mask like everyone still wore because of the recent pandemic. Nobody would recognize me on cameras. Not that I was trying to hide my identity long-term, but I also wasn't going to make it easy for them to catch me before doing what needed to be done. In the days before, I acted completely normal. I went to Masses, served as an altar boy. I accepted the humiliations from the priest and nun without complaining. They didn't suspect anything. Why would they? To them, I was just the broken boy they had under complete control for over a decade. On Thursday, one day before, I went to my father's grave. I hadn't been there in years. I stood there looking at the headstone and said out loud, "Dad, I'm sorry. Sorry for not being strong enough to endure without doing this, but I can't take it anymore, and I can't let them hurt anyone else." I cried. I cried a lot. It was the last time I cried for months. On Friday, I woke up calm, calmer than I'd been in years. I didn't take my anxiety medication. I wanted to be completely lucid, completely present. I took a long shower, dressed in dark clothes, put the knife inside a backpack, along with a change of clothes. I arrived at the church at 6:30. Mass started at 7. I served as I always served. I held the sacred objects, lit the candles, responded at the right moment. Father Marcus preached about forgiveness, about how God forgives all sins of those who truly repent. The irony wasn't lost on me. When Mass ended, the faithful left. My mother waved to me from the door. I waved back. It was the last time she saw me before everything changed. I stayed helping to arrange the altar, as I always did. Father Marcus and Sister Beatrice went to the sacristy. I heard the door close. I waited 5 minutes. I needed to make sure there was no one else in the church. I walked through the empty corridors, just silence and the smell of incense. I went back to the altar, grabbed my backpack that was hidden behind a column, took out the knife. It was a large meat-cutting knife. The blade gleamed under the candlelight. I held it firmly. My hands didn't tremble. My heart beat slowly, rhythmically. I was in control. I walked to the sacristy door. I took a deep breath. This was the line I could never undo after crossing. Once I opened that door, there would be no going back. I would be a murderer, would be arrested. My life as I knew it would end. But the lives of the next children would be spared. I opened the door. Father Marcus was sitting at the table counting money. Sister Beatrice was organizing liturgical vestments in the closet. They looked at me surprised. "Giovanni," the priest said, "what are you still doing here?" I didn't respond, just walked toward them. Sister Beatrice noticed the knife in my hand. I saw the exact moment fear took over her face. "Giovanni, what is this?" she asked, voice trembling, starting to back away. "It's the end," I responded. My voice came out firm, cold, unrecognizable. "It's the end of what you do to children. It's the end of the suffering you cause." Father Marcus stood up, trying to seem authoritative. "Giovanni, put that knife down now. This is madness. You're being influenced by the—" "Don't finish that sentence," I interrupted. "Don't say it's the demon. Don't say I'm the one who's wrong. You destroyed my life, destroyed my mind, made me want to die more times than I can count. And now you're doing the same to Andrew, to an innocent 12-year-old boy. We're saving him," Sister Beatrice screamed. "Saving you from sin, from eternal damnation. You don't understand, but—" I advanced. She tried to run, but I was faster. I grabbed her by the arm and pushed her against the wall. She screamed. Father Marcus came toward me, trying to stop me, but I spun and the knife cut the air. He backed away, frightened. "For years," I said, voice starting to crack. "Years I begged for help. I tried to tell people. I tried to kill myself to escape from you, and nobody did anything. Nobody protected me, not even my mother." "Your mother loves you," the priest said, voice trembling. "She only wants the best for you, and we—" "Lies!" I screamed. The rage I'd been holding for so long finally exploded. "You're liars, abusers, monsters using God as an excuse to hurt vulnerable children." Sister Beatrice started praying. A hurried, desperate, "Our Father." I looked at her and felt nothing. Not rage, not pity, just a cold emptiness. What happened in the next few minutes is something I remember in flashes, not linearly. It's as if my brain protected itself, fragmenting the memories. Flash. Me holding Sister Beatrice while she screams. Flash. The knife cutting, blood, a lot of blood. Flash. Father Marcus trying to open the door, but me blocking the way. Flash. Him falling to the floor, hands raised begging. Flash. My hand bringing the knife down. Again. Flash. Silence. Just silence. And the sound of my heavy breathing. When I fully regained consciousness, I was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, knife still in my hand, 2 bodies on the sacristy floor, blood everywhere, On the walls, on the floor, on my clothes, on my hands, and 2 heads separated from the bodies. It wasn't something I planned. The beheading happened in the middle of whatever that was. Rage, desperation, release, all together. I looked at what I'd done and expected to feel horror. I expected to feel guilt, disgust with myself, but I didn't. I felt relief, a deep relief, as if a decade's weight had been lifted from my shoulders. They were dead. They would never hurt anyone again. They would never destroy a child again. It was done. I sat there, I don't know for how long, maybe 10 minutes, maybe half an hour. I lost track. I just observed the bodies, processing what I'd done, accepting that my life as I knew it was over. I finally stood up, washed my hands in the sacristy sink. The water turned red. I changed clothes, putting on the clean clothes from the backpack. I put the blood-stained clothes back in the backpack. I cleaned the knife and put it away too. I walked out of the sacristy, locked the door from inside, and left through the small bathroom window attached. It was tight, but I managed to get through. Nobody saw me. I walked through the dark streets until I got home. My mother was in the living room watching a soap opera. "Took you long today?" she commented without taking her eyes off the TV. "Yeah, there was a lot to organize," I responded. I went to my room, put the backpack with the clothes and knife under the bed, lay down, looked at the ceiling, and slept. For the first time in years, I slept through the entire night without nightmares. The next morning, the custodian discovered the bodies. The police were called. The news spread quickly. 2 religious people brutally murdered inside the church. The community was in shock. I waited. I knew it was a matter of time. I didn't try to run. I didn't try to create an alibi. I went to the police station voluntarily 3 days later and confessed. "It was me," I told the detective. "I killed Father Marcus and Sister Beatrice." He looked at me incredulous. I was just a skinny 20-year-old boy, didn't seem capable of something so violent. But then I told everything. The entire history of abuse, the suicide attempts, the medical records, the years of psychological torture. They called a psychologist to evaluate me. She spent hours with me. In the end, her report said I suffered from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, result of prolonged psychological abuse throughout adolescence, that the act was the result of years of accumulated trauma. But it was still murder. I had taken 2 lives. The reason didn't matter. I would be tried. The trial was surreal. During my time in jail waiting for trial, I had a lot of time to think, to process, to fully understand what I had done. I was detained for 8 months before going to trial. 8 months in a small cell shared with 3 other men. 8 months protecting myself from threats, from violence, from everything that happens inside a prison. The news of my crimes spread. When the other inmates learned I killed a priest and a nun, the reactions were mixed. Some called me a demon. Others, when they learned the reason, respected me. "You did what needed to be done," one guy told me. "Nobody touches children." My mother visited me once, only once. She arrived, sat on the other side of the glass, picked up the phone, and stayed silent for 5 entire minutes, just looking at me. I could see in her eyes a mixture of everything: anger, sadness, confusion, maybe even a little guilt she would never admit. "Why?" she finally asked. "How could you?" "I tried to tell you," I responded, "for years, but you never wanted to listen." She hung up the phone and left. She never came back. The trial happened in March 2023. I was 21 at the time. My lawyer, a public defender named Dr. Henry, built a defense based on severe psychological trauma and diminished capacity. He brought my psychologist. My medical records, reports from psychiatrists who evaluated me, showed the pattern of abuse that Father Marcus had with other children in previous parishes. The prosecutor, of course, painted a different picture. He said I was calculating, cold, that I planned everything, that decapitation showed extreme cruelty, that I was a danger to society. When it was my turn to speak, I told the truth, all of it. I looked at the jurors and told every detail of what I went through. I saw tears in some eyes, saw revulsion in others, but I needed them to understand. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," I said. "I'm not asking you to say what I did was right, but I need you to understand that for 10 years I begged for help. 10 years being psychologically destroyed by people who should protect me. 10 years where the system failed me, where my own mother failed me. And when I saw they were starting to do the same to another child, I couldn't let it happen again. The verdict came after 2 days of deliberation, guilty of aggravated homicide, but with mitigating circumstances due to history of abuse. The sentence, 3 years in prison with possibility of progression to semi-open regime after 1 year, if I demonstrated good behavior. When I heard the sentence, I felt neither relief nor despair, just acceptance. 3 years. I could survive 3 years if I had survived 10 years of abuse. And I did. I served my sentence. During the time in there, I continued doing therapy, taking medication, working in the prison workshop, keeping my head down, staying away from trouble. I learned to cut hair, learned basic carpentry. I tried to prepare myself for when I got out. It was during that time that I really processed everything. The sessions with the prison psychologist helped me understand that what I did didn't erase my trauma, didn't cure me, just transferred the pain from one place to another. The nightmares continued, the flashbacks too. Only now, besides seeing the priest and nun hurting me, I saw their bodies on the sacristy floor. I saw my hand holding the knife, saw the blood. "Do you regret it?" the psychologist asked me once. I thought for a long time before answering. "I regret the method," I said honestly. "I regret the violence, but do I regret stopping them from hurting more children? No, I don't regret that." She wrote something down. I never knew what. I left prison in August last year, 10 months ago. I went straight to an apartment a social worker helped me get. A small place, 1 bedroom and living room, but it was mine. My mother didn't come to get me. I didn't know if she would be there, and I discovered she wasn't. I found out from neighbors later that she moved. I don't know where. I didn't try to find out. Adapting to life outside was harder than I imagined. The world kept spinning while I was locked up, and I felt disconnected from everything. I got the supermarket job through a reintegration program for ex-convicts. The manager knew about my history, but gave me a chance anyway. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said. I work, go home, do therapy, take my medication. It's a simple life, isolated. I don't have friends, don't have family. But I have peace, a strange peace, stained, incomplete. But it's more peace than I had in my entire life until that moment in the sacristy. Sometimes I wonder about Andrew, about what happened to him after. I tried to look, but didn't find information. I hope he's okay. I hope my action, as extreme as it was, at least spared him years of suffering. I know many people see me as a monster, and maybe they're right. Maybe I became exactly what Father Marcus and Sister Beatrice said I was. Someone capable of extreme violence, someone without adequate moral control. Or maybe I'm just a victim who was pushed beyond their limit. I don't know what the truth is. Maybe it's both at the same time. What I know is that that night changed everything. It took 2 lives, destroyed mine in a different way, completely broke my relationship with my mother, but it also saved other children from going through what I went through. And when I weigh these things on the scale, when I try to decide if it was worth it, I honestly don't know the answer. I live one day at a time now. I wake up, go to work, come home. Some days are better, others the flashbacks paralyze me, and I spend hours curled up in the corner of my apartment, trembling, reliving everything, both the abuse and what I did in response. The guilt comes in waves, not guilt for having stopped them, but guilt for the violence, for the blood, for having become capable of taking lives. That's the hardest part to carry. Knowing that inside me exists this capacity, that in extreme circumstances I'm capable of killing. But there's also another feeling harder to admit. A small feeling, hidden, that sometimes appears when I'm almost asleep. Satisfaction. Satisfaction for having made them pay, for having stopped them from continuing, for having taken control of a situation where I had no control for a decade. And maybe that makes me a monster. Maybe good people, normal people wouldn't feel that. But I stopped trying to be normal a long time ago. Normal died in me when I was 10 years old, and a priest started destroying my mind in God's name. If you made it this far, if you really understood what I went through, if you can see the complexity of all this without simply labeling me as villain or victim, I need you to do something. Like this video, subscribe to Traumatic Accounts, turn on notifications, and comment what time it is where you are right now while you're watching this. I need to know my story was heard, that it wasn't in vain to tell all this, that maybe, just maybe, someone out there going through something similar will see they're not alone. I don't know what the future holds for me. I don't know if one day I'll be able to have a normal life, if I'll be able to form relationships, if I'll be able to completely overcome the trauma. Probably not. I'll probably carry this until I die. But I know one thing. Father Marcus and Sister Beatrice will never hurt anyone again. And if I have to carry the weight of 2 deaths to guarantee that, then so be it. It's a weight I chose to carry, and I'll live with that choice until my last day.